But here's something I know that is true for all of us, whether you're religious or not, whether you're kind of been at this thing for a long, long time or short amount of time, or even just kind of still thinking about it, and that's simply this, that we're lost before we know we are. In fact, I just want you to think back to last time you were lost in life. When you found out you were lost, it wasn't like, oh my, right? Because if you're a guy, and I told you this last week, right? Guys are like, we're never lost. We just may not know where we're at the moment. And it may take us a few moments and doing some research, but we will get out of this thing, right? So I'm not really lost. I'm just not sure where I'm at, right? And if we knew where we got lost at, we'd go back there and start over again, because we've done this with our keys, right? I know I left my keys right there, but they aren't there, which tells me something really important, that I didn't leave my keys right there, right? But that's where I left them. That's where I know I left them. That's where I always leave them, which are things we tell ourselves, but we know they're not true, because if they were true, the keys would be there. So we go back to, where's the last time we remember having them? Because we all do this. How am I going to find them? I go back to the last place, and we look, and we don't find them. See, the reality is we're lost before we know we are, because if we could go back to when we knew we were okay, and then we got lost, we would be fine. We would have done that already. And not only are we lost before we know we are, we resist the idea of being. That's supposed to be the word being lost, not brain lost. We resist the idea of being lost. Now, I can't speak for women. I can't speak for men. I will take that risk to speak for all men, that we really resist the idea of being lost. Sometimes, if we're honest, guys, to our detriment. And today we're going to look at a story that Jesus told, a made-up story, a pretend story. Well, one of his parables, and parables are simply designed to teach a singular spiritual truth. And today he tells this story, and if you were here last week, you already know where the story is going, which story it's probably going to be. But it's one of those stories that is one of the most uncomfortable parables, made-up stories that Jesus ever told. It's uncomfortable because we're not really sure what he's teaching in it. We're not really sure who we're in it. And we're kind of uncomfortable with the picture of God that comes out of it. But before we get there, I invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, right? Father, the thing I pray for myself this morning is the gift of never forgetting not only my potential, but the reality that at times I am lost. Because sometimes it takes recognizing, for me at least, that I am lost to look for help, to look for a way out, to look for a way back, to look for a way to be back with my family, my friends, my community. And for that person, or maybe persons who are here today, who find themselves in a similar thing, of at times resisting their lostness, maybe not even recognizing their lostness. I pray today that maybe through this old story, this made-up story that Jesus made, that it can make us uncomfortable enough to maybe rethink how we think about ourselves and our lostness and our foundness. And if you can do that today, this will have been time well spent. Well, thank you for what's happened in your name. Amen. Now, if you're here last week, these three stories, I'm going to cover two of them. Pastor Chelsea's going to cover another one next week. They come in a particular setting, and this guy named Luke, who writes about Jesus' life, not an eyewitness, but a guy who listened to eyewitnesses and secondhand stories and lots of different stories of Jesus. He writes about a particular setting that elicited from Jesus this story. It's really the three stories about this idea of lostness. And it's interesting that Luke is the only one of the people that wrote about Jesus' life that includes these stories, which is kind of curious to me. And I have my own pet theories, but I'm not going to share them right now. But it's just interesting that these stories, which are so important and so much a part of, if you've ever been around a place like this, a church, you have heard these stories at some point in your life, probably multiple times. Maybe when you were small, maybe when you were going through your teenage or high school years, your parents reminded you of these stories. But here's the setting that, as Luke paints out. He says, there's this moment, he says, when something happens, that the tax collectors and the sinners have all come to listen to Jesus. In fact, in the original language, in the Greek there, it actually is this idea that they keep coming. It's not like just in this one moment they show up, but it's like they're regularly starting to show up more and more and more and more. Which I think Luke includes this because that's an incredible idea. That you have the sinners and tax collectors, right? These two, groups of people that everybody looked down on who begin to show up. And it reminds us this important fact. Let's do a quick review of last week. This important truth about this, which is that simply people nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. Which seems a little hard for us to imagine because we know some people who say they're followers of Jesus that even as our own selves being followers of Jesus, we're so much like them. And to think that other people would like them, right? But Luke says this is an incredible thing, that people, nothing like Jesus, and on top of it, and Jesus liked them. Which led to an interesting issue because Luke captured it. He said, this is incredible, isn't it? These people show up, and a group of people were like, no, this is not incredible. This is embarrassing. This is wrong. Because Luke says, but the Pharisees, those devoutly religious people, and the teachers of the law, the scribes, they began to complain. We talked about this last week, right? The word murmur, right? Great word. Just say it again. Yeah, it just feels bad, doesn't it? Murmur. They begin to murmur and grumble, and I know some of us have no idea what that looks like, but some people do. But they begin to murmur, and here's what they murmur and grumble and complain about. Look, this man, talking about Jesus, this man welcomes, he associates with sinners, and he even eats with them. The audacity of this man doing that with those people. Because how is that even possible? And I told you last week, Jesus recognizes at that moment something that some of the people in the crowd had forgotten. And it's simply this, that nobody plans to mess up their life. Think of your own life, think of somebody else's life. Nobody starts off planning they're going to go bankrupt. Nobody gets married to planning they're going to get a divorce. Nobody plans to get addicted to things. Nobody plans to, because they didn't go to college and they took a gap year that ended up being like 5 years and then 10 years that they didn't end up in the place. Nobody plans to mess up their life. But what happens is things like life, things like circumstances, things like perceived opportunities that pop up in life and we go after them or we don't go after them, and those all impact how we end up in life. There's moments of passion. There are moments of mindlessness. There's moments of desperation. Sometimes it's moments of defiance that end up messing up our life. And Jesus recognizes that. So Jesus, knowing he can't just come out right out and say, you guys are wrong or you guys are right, or let me just he does what Jesus so often does. Luke simply says this. Now Jesus tells them a story, a parable. And if you've read this story before, you know it's actually 3 stories, right? And it's a short story. It's a short story about a lamb who wanders off. It's an even shorter story about a coin that gets misplaced. And then it's like not just a long, but like a really long story about a son who intentionally leaves. And as I told you last week, I think what Jesus is trying to do as he begins to tell these stories is to capture an emotion that everybody in that crowd, the tax collectors, the sinners, the Pharisees, the teachers of law, the regular people that were probably mixed in among those groups, he tries to capture an emotion that everybody has experienced, even everybody here today. And it's simply this, that we've all lost something. And when we lose something, here's what, we all do the same thing when we lose something of value, right? I told you this last week, right? What do? We go looking for it. Not a hard answer, right? You go looking for it. If you do something of value, you're going to go looking for it. So Jesus tells the first 2 stories recognizing that that's kind of the normal one. But when he tells the third story, Jesus recognizes the thing that sometimes we forget in that whole idea, great big idea, that when we've lost something, we go looking for it because not always do we go looking for it. And so he begins to tell the story. And it starts this way. A man has 2 sons, right? So which means there's an older son and a younger one, right? And the younger son says to his father, Father, give me my share of the inheritance. Basically, he's telling his father, I wish you were dead. And I want you to think back now to capture the emotion. You have this mixed group, right? They've listened to 2 stories. The first one, they caught themselves all saying yes, that you would go search for the sheep. Yes, and they begin to feel uncomfortable because everybody's agreeing on this, which is like weird because sinners and tax collectors and devoutly religious people and teachers of the law, they don't always agree on hardly anything, right? And they're like, yes, well, we're all agreeing on this. And then Jesus dropped the bombshell, right? There's more joy in heaven over one lost that gets found than over the 99 that are found. And everybody's like, whoa, what? And then Jesus jumps to the second story that Pastor Chelsea's going to cover next week. But it's a quick one. A coin gets lost, it gets found, and oh, by the way, there's this great joy. And so they've gone through this emotions of everybody agreeing and then everybody pulling back. And now I think when Jesus begins this story, he has a group of people sitting, some of them at least, sitting like this. Because you caught me twice, you're not catching me a third time. And if Jesus told another story about something that got lost and misplaced and how we went and searched for it, they wouldn't have bought it. But Jesus begins with something that gets everybody's emotion. In fact, when the younger son says this in the story, I imagine everybody in the crowd is like, oh, no, he didn't. And I had this big gasp. Everybody gasped for a moment. Yeah, everybody's like, oh, this is terrible. I mean, who would do? In fact, I think the sinners are looking at the religious people and are going like, no, we wouldn't do this, right? Even the tax collectors are going like, I've sold out our nation. I'm getting, rich off everybody. But even I'm not going to tell him dead, right? I mean, I might tax him, but I'm not going to tell him he's going to be dead, right? And everybody finds themselves shaking their head this way, and they begin to notice that everybody's shaking their head this way, which again is one of those weird moments, and now they've been caught. Because they were agreeing before, now they're disagreeing, but everybody's disagreeing that this is not something you should do. And then Jesus says, I wish you were dead. And so the father, everybody waits because they expect the father to do what fathers ought to do. Rich, and you would fill in the blank a different way than I might, but all of us are going to have some kind of response that a father would do if their youngest son said, I wish you were dead, give me my part of the inheritance. So the father, and again, slapped him upside the head, told him, you're dead to me. I don't even know who you are. I don't have a son, right? You cut him off, whatever the thing is. But Jesus says, so the father divides the property, the wealth, the assets. Literally, the word there is life. He divides his life between his 2 sons. To which everybody in the crowd again goes, thank you. Thanks for playing along. Appreciate that. Because it's like, no, he did. I mean, the son can't do that, but how does the father take all the stuff that he's been earning all of his life, storing up to someday pass along to his 2 sons, and just go about dividing it? It's beyond comprehension for the people there. And let's be honest, it would be beyond comprehension for us to think that a father today would say, all right, you want your inheritance now? I'm going to cash you out. Go on. Be great. So Luke said, the story goes on. Jesus says, listen, sometime later, after not many days, not very long afterwards, the younger son, he decides, he gets all his stuff up, and he heads off, and he goes out to this country a long ways away. Get away from family, get away from my backstory. I get to be a new person. I am rich. I'm going to go have the time of my life. And Jesus says that's what he does. He goes, and he wasted, he squandered his money in wild, reckless living. And all of us know what wild and reckless living looks like, because even if we've never done it, we wish we could have done it. He's got the sweet apartment. He's got the cars. He's got all the bling. He goes to the clubs. Going to the club, right? He even probably goes to those clubs, makes it rain. He's just putting a couple nice young ladies through college. But he's living the life. He is living the dream. I mean, he's got money, and he doesn't have any responsibilities, and he is just enjoying it all. But Jesus says, oh, by the way, after he spent everything, because the money does run out. In fact, most of the time when we have something like this, money tends to run out quicker than we think money's going to run out, right? In fact, it ran out a whole lot quicker than it took for his dad to earn all of that money. But after he runs out of it, something else happens. Jesus says it gets worse, that a time came when there was a severe famine in the country. And everybody in the crowd goes, oh, that's too bad. Serves him right? And the son was poor, and he was hungry. He began to be in need, right? And everybody in the crowd is starting to shake their head, yes. Because what goes around, there we go, right? So Jesus said, the guy tries to get his hand on himself. He gets a job. He hires himself out to one of the citizens there who sends him out in the field to feed the pigs, to which everybody goes, oh, no. We're going to try it one more time. He sends him out to the fields to feed pigs. Yeah, because everybody's like, oh, no. Again, the sinners, the tax collectors are looking like the religious people are like, no, we're bad people. We're not doing that. Because in their culture, in their religion, in their faith system, pigs were unclean in lots of ways. They didn't eat them. Not only did not eat them, you didn't raise them, you didn't buy them, you didn't sell them, you didn't even touch them. They were like, that's just something that nobody would even think to do. Even the sinners and tax collectors are thinking like, we wouldn't even do that. And the crowd now is just like, oh, think about this kid's gone and what he's done and how low he's sunk. And Jesus goes on and says, listen, the son was so hungry. He was so hungry that he wanted to eat the pods that the pigs were eating. He was in such hard straits that he was glad to eat whatever the pigs were getting. I don't know if you've been around pigs. I used to be a butcher, and we would butcher all sorts of animals. And I had a boss who had a little farm, and we went out to butcher one of the pigs one day. And you know, you got to feed them before that, and it's not a pretty sight. But this kid's now at this place, I just wish I could eat what they're getting. But he says, Jesus says, no one gave him anything. To which everybody in the crowd said these words, and I want you to read them when I put them up here. Say it like you mean it, all right? Right? I mean, to do that to your father, to say, I wish he was dead, and for the father to do that, it's crazy. But the fact that he takes that stuff, he blows through it, and he finds himself in this situation, this famine, he's got to hire out, and now he's at the lowest of the lowest of the low. Yeah, he gets what he deserves. And this would have been a great moral story. You know, you can see the parents going home that night, sitting with their kids. Oh, kids, we got to tell you this story we heard from this great rabbi today, right? But what happens when you disrespect your father? What happens when you wish they were dead? What happens when you want to take off and live however you want to do, whatever you want to do? You know what happens, boys and girls? You end up in a pigsty, caring for pigs and wanting to eat what they eat. And all the kids are like, no, Daddy, don't let that happen. Right? And the father's like, yeah, baby, this is the great moral story. And it would have been a great moral story if Jesus had stopped there. But this is a long story. So Jesus doesn't stop there. When everybody's feeling like this is a great story, he did bad, now he's getting his dessert, what he deserves. Jesus says, no. When he realized what he was doing, when he came to himself, when he thought, all my father's servants, all his hired workers have plenty of food. They have more than enough food there. And I'm here, and I'm almost dying with hunger. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get up, I'm going to go to my father, and I'm going to say to him, Father, I have sinned against God, and I've sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son, but make me like one of your servants, one of your hired workers. So the son left and went to the father. And again, the crowd that day is like, oh, man. But here's what they think as Jesus says these words. They think, okay, now he's going to get what's coming to him, right? Because now we're going to go home and see the father, and the father's going to be like, I don't have one son. Well, the son's dead to me, right? He crossed that line. I don't want to talk to him. I don't ever want to be around that person again. They crossed that line. Once you cross the line, you're done. They expect the father to put this kid in his place. And everybody, because here's what happens. Everybody in that audience knew what he deserved. And the reason it is because every one of them in that audience knew what they would do if that were their son. So everybody's now waiting for what Jesus says will happen when the son gets home. And I think Jesus pauses this. I think he kind of looks around, makes sure there's the crowd with him, seeing which way their heads are going, how they're looking at each other. And he says, listen, guys, while the son was still a long ways off, his father saw him. And his father felt. And I think Jesus pauses because he wants them to put in the word that they think he's going to feel. Because he knows the word they're going to put in there is not the word he's going to put in there. Because it's not the word that most of us, if not all of us, would put in there. They expect when they see that kid coming, vengeance, anger, frustration, disappointment, sadness, whatever term you want to be, is going to be the term. And Jesus says, no, when the father sees him a long ways off, the father feels compassion for his son. And everybody in the crowd goes, exactly. Because they don't know any father that would feel this way. And then the story goes worse. Because now they're back rocking, and they're all shaking their heads no. And again, they're all agreeing this is no, and this is weird again. And Jesus says, by the way, the father, he runs to him. Which fathers back then, you didn't run. The kids ran to you, you didn't go to them. Sign of respect. You got to know your place, know your position, know your lane. But the father runs to him and he hugs and kisses. The father is the one initiating the hugs, is initiating the kisses to this kid. And everybody's head is really going now, right? And the son, Jesus says, begins to have his discussion, right? Father, I've sinned against you. I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against God. And I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to my wife, tells to his servants, hurry. Bring the best clothes. Bring the first robe, is the literal language there, and put it on him. This wasn't just because his clothes were shabby from working with pigs. This was like, no, we're restoring this kid. We're going to put the house coat on him, right? And also put a ring on his finger. And ladies, that's not like Beyonce's put a ring on it kind of thing. This would have been a signet ring. This is like they gave him the credit cards and the keys to the house. And put sandals on his feet because while hired servants might go barefoot, no son of mine is going to go barefoot. And Luke says that Jesus said, and to make it worse, get our fattened calf and kill it so we can have a feast and celebrate. The fattened calf was a calf that you kind of kept always kind of prime, ready to go. And then when you knew a big party was coming up, you put some more stuff to get him nice and fat. Because you were going to have a party. You don't want to have a party with a little bitty skinny cow. You want a fat cow. Because you want to have a good party, right? And there's a reason for all this. The father says this incredible thing. Everybody in the crowd is just beyond belief. They're trying to get their minds around it, and there's no possible way to get their minds around this because this is not what a father would do. And all the stuff is doing is beyond what even a good father would do. And they don't know what to respond. And there's a reason to celebrate. In fact, the father has this great line that Jesus puts in his mouth. And he says, my son was dead, but now he's alive. He's alive again. And he was lost, but now he's found. So then Jesus says, so what happened is, they began to celebrate. They began to have this huge party. And I think at that moment, Jesus has to pause for a second. He has to let people's minds get caught up because I think everyone in the crowd is thinking some questions. And here's what they're thinking. How could the Father be so forgiving? How is that possible? After everything that the Son put him through, how could a father respond in that way? How could he not at least get some kind of commitment, some kind of assurance that the son wasn't going to do this? How could the father be so forgiving? And maybe a more important question that began to bounce around everybody's minds was, why? Why would the father be so forgiving? I mean, what's he going to get out of it? And if Jesus had stopped there, this would have been a really good story. Again, when they were talking to their kids later, they wouldn't have an explanation, but I just want you to know what this guy taught. But Jesus had started the story by saying there were, do you remember? 2 sons. So Jesus goes, we got to bring back the other son. So the party's going on, the cows cooking, they're just having a great time. And the older son, he's out in the field because he's doing what he does, every day. He's out there working. He's providing for he's gotten his inheritance. In fact, in their culture, he had gotten 2/3 of the inheritance. Because it wasn't 50-50. If you were the older son, you got more than the younger son, which all the younger siblings said, yeah, that's bad. Yeah, that's not fair. But that's how it was, right? So he's got the bigger, but he's taking care of business, right? He's now this is all his. And now he's working not just for his dad, but for himself. But he's out in the field, and as he gets closer, he comes in, and as he gets closer to the house, he hears the sound of music and dancing. And the whole crowd, I think, is like, they're leaning forward now. Because it's like, what's going to happen now? So he hears the sound of music and dancing. He summons one of the household servants and asks him, what's all this mean? What's all the noise? What's all the dance? I hear sounds. Well, what's going on? And the servant says, your brother has come back. And your father? Don't ask me to explain it. He's killed a fattened calf. And he's done it because your brother came home safe and sound. Which again, the crowd is like, that does not make any sense. How do you throw a party for somebody who did everything he did? How do you throw a party just for the fact that he came home? And then Jesus says, but the older brother, he was angry. And everybody in the crowd went, yep, that's right. And you know why he was angry? Because he should have been angry. That's what everybody in the crowd thought, right? He should have been angry. This is the brother that kind of messed everything up, put all the responsibilities on his back now. This is the brother that took off and did whatever he wanted. The one that wasn't willing to stick in it through the hardships and through thick and thin and through all those kinds of things. But the older son's angry, and he would not go into the feast. He has no desire to go into the feast because why would I want to go in and celebrate all this kind of stuff? You ever find yourself angry at some other people for the knucklehead stuff they do? Anybody else out there with me? Have you ever noticed how angry we get when others don't meet our expectations? That's just an observation. That's not a declaration of anything. I'm just saying, have you ever observed that we can get so angry at people who let us down, right? Who don't follow through, who don't do what we asked them to do, told them to do, expected them to do. In fact, we get really angry if they knew those things and kind of put it back in our face. And if you've ever had that experience, let me ask you a follow-up question I think is maybe more important, which is simply this. Have you ever wondered or asked yourself, why? Where does that anger come from? And for most of us, it's the fact that they let us down. They broke our expectations. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. They didn't hold up their end of the bargain. Let me ask you another question. Because we've all felt that kind of anger. And actually normally felt pretty good about that kind of anger. Maybe not about the total way we expressed it, but the fact that somebody had to express it. At least, I may not have done it perfectly, but somebody had to say those things. Is it right anger? And I think our temptation is to say, of course it was right anger, Mike. They did this. They didn't do that. They put it in our face. They flaunted it all. They blew through it all. They not only should have known better, they knew better, and they did all this stuff. Of course it's right anger. And my second question would simply be, is it really right anger? Now, I personally believe that anger is an emotion that God has given us. So I don't think all anger is bad. Our problem for most of us is not that we're angry, it's how it comes out and how it affects us and how it affects other people. And how we feel good about that anger at times. But I got off the story from Jesus. So let's get back to Jesus' story, right? So the older son's out there. He's angry. He doesn't want to go in. So his father goes out, and he begins to beg and begins to urge him, encourage him for him to come on in. But the older son is not having it. Everybody's like, yeah, that's right. They're kind of all caught in the story. The older son says to the father these words, listen, look, I have served you like a slave for many years. I've done my part. And have always obeyed, I never neglected your commands. But you never gave me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends. I've slaved day in, day out. I've done everything I can to make this business a success, to keep a roof over our heads, to provide all these kinds of things. And you've never given me even something small. But this son of yours, don't you love this language? But this son of yours, who wasted, who squandered, who devoured all your money, your life on prostitutes. Don't tell mom, but this is the story. He's blown it all on prostitutes. He comes home, and you kill the fattened calf for him? Not a question, but a statement. And I think everybody in the crowd is shaking their head, yeah. The older son knows how things ought to work. The older son is offended because he should be offended. And everybody's like, yeah. Even the sinners are like, yeah. This doesn't seem fair. This doesn't seem right. And the father says, in Jesus' story, this made-up story, the father says to him, to the older son, son, you're always with me. Literally, it can be, you've always stood by me. You've always been there. And that's not just a statement about the fact that you've always been there, but we've always been there together. And all that I have is yours. And he's simply stating a fact that everything he has is his because, remember, he divided the inheritance. So the father doesn't have anything. He is living off the good graces of his oldest son. The oldest son hasn't put that together, but everything I have is yours. And then the father says those words that for some of us don't make much sense, but for those of us, we sure hope they are true. But we had to celebrate and be happy. We had to rejoice because your brother, this brother of yours, was dead, and now he is alive. He's come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And then Jesus says, he didn't say anything, by the way. That's simply the end right there. Which is like a terrible way to end, right? I mean, there was 2 or 3 spots you could have ended. It would have been a great moral story. But now he ends it without an ending. I don't know about you. I read this, every time I've read the story, I have some questions. I want to know what happened. Right? I mean, did the older son stay out or did he go in? I mean, they're at a standoff right at this moment, but what does he do? Does he listen to his father? Does he begrudgingly go in? Does he have a change of heart or does he hold his ground? Did the father stay with him or does he go back to the party? If that son stays out? And maybe the bigger question is, did the younger son get his act together? Finally. And what if? What if Jesus ended it there? So we take a look at how we look. Of how we see things, how we see life, how we see God. We ended it there so we take a look at how we look at ourselves. Because again, this is a parable, and in parables, typically somebody or something represents God. which means something or somebody represents people. And we got like 3 choices, and it's pretty clear that the younger brother isn't God, and it doesn't sound like the older brother's God, and so it sounds like the father's God, which is a whole different picture for some of us of what God could possibly be like. But then it also means that we're either the younger son or the older son in this scenario. And maybe the reason Jesus doesn't finish the story is because it's up to us. Maybe he wants us to look at ourselves, and maybe he wants to look at others as well. See, what if at the core of this whole third story, what if it's about how we feel about the mess ups in life? Because there are lots of mess ups in life, right? Most of them are things we never planned for. Oftentimes they involve home improvement projects. Sometimes they involve people. Sometimes they involve people that are close to us. And the story really seems to be more an emotional story than it is about, let me just tell you what the point is and how this thing works. Because notice, Jesus didn't end the third story. He's ended the other 2 with the whole idea of, I want you all to know that there's more joy in heaven over one sinner, one person repenting and turning back, than over a bunch of people who don't need to repent. This time he doesn't even get into that. I mean, how we feel about those mess-ups in our lives. How we feel about them, because I'm guessing most of us have a them who's a mess-up in our life. Hopefully it's not us, but it's somebody else, right? It wouldn't be us. But maybe it's that cousin. Maybe it's that uncle. Maybe it's our kid. Maybe it's not just about them being a mess up. Maybe it's about thinking about how we feel about the mess ups that are theirs. Because kids, ladies and gentlemen who do not have kids, let me give you a little heads up. Kids make messes. It's kind of part of the package, right? As a new parent bringing home that baby for the first time, those thoughts go through your mind as you drive away from that hospital. Who in their right mind would leave me a baby to take home? And then the first time the baby has eaten and done what they do after they eat, you're like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. And where did all this come from? And you are open to a whole life now, the first of very many mess-ups. Mess-ups that happen just organically and naturally. Mess-ups that happen unintentionally when they spill their juice, when they knock food around. Mess-ups that happen intentionally when they throw their food off. And you tell them don't, and they look at you and they go. And what if it's about how we feel about the mess-ups in our life? Because for some of us, when we have a mess up, it drops us way down. And we get really hard on ourselves because how could I do that? How could I do that again? Or how could I not be thinking? How could I how could I have messed up? How could I have not measured right? How could I not planned right? How could this happen? It shouldn't have happened this way. And others of us are the whole opposite way. We're like, stuff happens, and we go on. Now, we're not typically that way with other people, but for ourselves, we're pretty much that way. And it goes back to something that all of us learned really early in life. And that's that in life, we've learned that our behavior matters. You think about almost every aspect of life, behavior matters. It matters when you're a kid. Any of you have this experience? When I was a kid, before we would go to somebody's house for the very first time, my mother and father would turn to my brother and I in the back seat and say, Make sure you behave yourselves so these people will invite us back. Anybody else with me on that one? And it was this warning. You behave. Well, and there was a history of corrective application that would happen if we didn't. So there was kind of another piece in the mind, right? But you go to school and you get this wonderful thing called grades. And it's partly based on behavior, right? Did I study? Did I produce the results they wanted? And we learn early on that our behavior matters and that it influences the way people think about us, the way they talk about us, the way they respond to us. And while that is our experience in so much of life, here's what happens to us. Since behavior matters, it must matter to God. And we tend to believe that God looks at us through the lens of what we do. And here's a question. It could be an uncomfortable question. Some of you may, as soon as you see it, may go, I'm not so sure, Mike, but just let it hang for a moment, all right? What if that's not true? And to make some of you feel a little more comfortable, at least not as much as we may believe. Because here's the truth. We've all been lost at some point, right? Not only have we been lost at some point, there are lots and lots of ways. There are lots of ways to be lost. In fact, if you look at the stories Jesus tells, he shows you 3 examples of places, ways to get lost. In fact, even in this story we looked at today, there's a couple of ways to get lost. You can get lost, dissing your family, disrespecting your family, leaving, going to have, living up the dream until it runs out. And you can be lost a long way from home. And apparently you can be lost all the time at home. Even when you think you're doing the right things at home. You're doing the chores. You're putting stuff where it goes. You're saying yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. There are lots of ways to be lost. And that's because there is a truth that is true for everybody. It's not a religious truth. It's just a people truth, and that's this, that life is hard. And no one, as I told you last week, and I want to tell you one more time, no one sets out to mess up their life. Nobody plans for that. Nobody, expects that. And if you find yourself in this moment, recognizing that while you didn't plan to, you have. I just want to say something, what I hope is real clearly to you today. And that's simply this, that if you're living in a way isn't good, and it isn't good for, whether it's for you or for them, whoever them might be, or for God, whichever, any kind of way that you just know that you're living in a way that isn't good for one of those 3 things, I want you to know something. I want you to know that you haven't gone too far. Maybe you just got a little lost. Because at times, all of us sometimes get a little lost, right? We get a little lost of path, we get distracted, and then we're like, where'd the group go? And you try to, hustle and get back up. Maybe it's just a little lost. Maybe you're a lot lost. And some of us have been a lot lost. Some of us for a long time, we've been a lot lost. But whether it's a little lost or a lot lost, here's what you need to know. You have not been too lost. Because let's wrap it up with some what ifs. What if the Father really does represent God? If that Father, who was too forgiving, too caring, too generous, too reckless is the picture Jesus wants us to see of who God is, maybe we need to readjust our picture of who God is. Because what if there is more to following Jesus than staying out of trouble? What if it's more than just saying, I've always done right, or tried to do right, I've always been there, I've been steady? That doesn't just count for something, that counts for everything. What if there's more to following Jesus than staying out of trouble? And what if we became less prone to sizing people up and writing them off and more celebrating of direction? And I said that fast because I want to give you a second to let it process. Because what would that look like? And is that even something that we would consider choosing to do? Or are we happy where we're at? Are we comfortable where we're at? Are we good where we're at? Because what if how we answer that is how the story finishes? Something to think about.